Fresh off Iowa's bye week, and you could say our bye week, we take a look at the Big Ten West. Where does Iowa stand in relation to the rest of the division? The race for Indy is on. How is Minnesota making a push for the title? And also Wisconsin beating Purdue over the weekend. And, of course, Iowa's big-time matchup with Wisconsin this coming weekend. Plus, who shares the blame for Iowa's recent struggles offensively? We'll talk about it here on the podcast and give our keys to success for what I'm calling the biggest game of the season this coming Saturday in Madison. All that and much more coming up during week 178 of Brada's Branded Thoughts. This is from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Are you a Hawkeye fan living in Story County? Well, if you are, great. If not, we've still got you covered. Introducing From the Hawkeye of the Storm, your source for original Iowa content from the Eye of the Storm, the Hawkeye of the Storm, Ames, Iowa. That's right. Our Hawkeye platform, hosted by StoryCounty.News, strives to offer a unique perspective that you won't find anywhere else. Despite living amid the sea of red that is Cyclone Country, we make it our aim to entertain and inform Hawkeye fans everywhere. From live programming following an Iowa athletic event, to our on-demand podcast, Brada's Branded Thoughts, which you can access through YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Amazon, and more. Our goal is to always offer cutting-edge black and gold content. In addition, catch our weekly college football picks throughout the season as you get prepped for the weekend ahead. And the great thing about all of our content is it's all free. Join us regularly here at From the Hawkeye of the Storm, and be sure to subscribe to our sister channel, Iowa Football at the Voice of College Football. That's Iowa Football at the Voice of College Football on YouTube, as we have teamed up with Mark Rogers and former Iowa football assistant coach Don Patterson to bring you live post-game shows after every Iowa football game. Watch, chat, and even call in to let your voice be heard each and every weekend this fall. Want to learn how you can further support us? Visit our video description on each and every YouTube video we publish. And then, of course, enjoy the content. It's From the Hawkeye of the Storm, hosted by StoryCounty.News, for the best Hawkeye content in the area. We are back here at From the Hawkeye of the Storm after our brief hiatus during the bye week. We kind of took some time off as well to regather ourselves and get about as good of a time breather as possible. About midway through the season. We are 7 games into Iowa's 2021 campaign. Certainly not the way these Hawkeyes wanted to go into the bye week, with losing pretty soundly to the Purdue Boilermakers. And although I don't want to take a lot of time to rehash what we've already rehashed over and over again, especially over at the Iowa at the Voice of College Football channel, if you follow us there on YouTube, I do want to address a couple of things related to that game. First of all, everybody wants to play the blame game for any Iowa loss, or any loss in general, for, I think, any fan base. That you want to either blame the quarterback, you want to blame the coach, you want to blame the administration, whatever the case may be. So who is to blame, not only for the loss to Purdue, the 24-7 loss to Purdue, beat down at home to an unranked team, but more so, I think we have to look at this for what it is. Consistent offensive struggles during the Kirk Ferentz era, right? This is 23 years now we've seen consistent offensive struggles. Now, has there been some exceptions? Yes, there have. There have been exceptions over the years, right? I think back to 2015, the team went 12-0, decent enough offense to get through it. How they matched up to Stanford in the Rose Bowl was a much different story. But there have been seasons where I thought 2009 was a pretty darn good offensive year. The skill position talent Iowa had made up for what was some, I think, some coaching gaffes in 2009. I think to the game against Northwestern, you'll recall the bootleg out of the end zone, which was just a terrible call. Should go down as Ken O'Keefe's worst call as an offensive coordinator at Iowa. Of course, he breaks his leg, goes down, and Iowa ends up in the Orange Bowl, wins the Orange Bowl, but boy, it could have been a lot better. Could have been Rose Bowl or better in 2009 had that play not been called. But the bottom line is Iowa's struggling offensively. We know that, and this has not been a secret. I think a lot of fans, including probably myself at times, we've kind of ignored the offensive issues to a degree because the team had been winning, right? You're 6-0. That first win against Indiana was at the time, looked like a very impressive win, although Indiana is just completely derailed now. Completely derailed. Iowa State looked like a really good win, and man, that's going to be the best win on the schedule. When we look back at that game in December, that will have been the best win, unless Iowa goes to Indy and knocks off Ohio State. That game against Iowa State will be the best win on Iowa's schedule. And the way they did it, I mean, they won by 10 points on the road. Impressive. But again, the offense was never really there. Indiana, you had the 2 pick sixes from Riley Moss. It was just a terrific start for Iowa. So we kind of, again, assumed the offense would improve as we went along. Kent State was not a great performance, but they survived. They won by double digits. Same thing with Colorado State, although Colorado State was closer at halftime. And then we get to Big Ten play, and resume Big Ten play, I should say, and Iowa destroys Maryland on the road, right? And that was I think fans kind of looked at that, and even national pundits looked at that game as sort of Iowa's coming out party. Because, yeah, they forced, 6 interceptions, but it was more than that. It was consistent offensively. They did it on the road. They did it with the run game. Tyler Goodson was spectacular in that game. Spencer Petras had some nice throws. And we expected that to continue. They follow up with, a game against Penn State where I think every Iowa fan just wanted to win that game, and they did. Now, Penn State fans were calling, for, the claim that Clifford, their quarterback, was out, and that was basically the reason why Iowa was able to come back in that game. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, that's certainly a conversation you can have. At this point, it doesn't matter. But my point is, we weren't really paying a whole lot of attention against Penn State as far as Iowa's offense is concerned, because, again, it's one of the better teams. We looked at Penn State as one of the better teams in the country, and so we just wanted to win that game. And then finally, you have a game against Purdue, Game 7, where, once again, Iowa's offense doesn't do a whole lot. And they didn't do a whole lot in any of those games we just talked about other than Maryland. But this time, Iowa's defense doesn't put Iowa in position to score consistently, doesn't basically win the game for the Hawkeyes. And let's be honest, the special teams, the kick returns for Iowa were spectacular against Purdue. You have the huge kickoff return by Ivory Kelly-Martin that ended up inside the red zone. Charlie Jones had an unbelievable, if you want to watch a heck of a punt return, watch that punt return against Purdue where he put Iowa inside the red zone. But both times Iowa came up empty, and that was the storyline of the day. But overall, Iowa's defense just did not play up to standard, primarily coverage of David Bell. I mean, guy goes off for 240 yards. It's ridiculous. The fact that he's just burned Iowa consistently. The last time they played Purdue, Bell went for 197 yards on 11 catches. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There's no reason for Iowa's defense to struggle this much with one guy. There's just no reason. So again, where does the blame lie? Not only for the offensive struggles, but the defensive struggles against Purdue. Well, let's be reasonable here. Everybody wants to blame Spencer Petras or blame Matt Hankins because he got burned several times against David Bell. You could argue more than several times, but it's at least in man-to-man tight coverage, he got burned, at least on a couple of occasions that I can recall off the top of my head. But primarily the blame lies with the head coach, Kirk Ferentz, right? I mean, again, these are not new issues. As far as the offense is concerned, the offense did nothing against Purdue. I mean, they had, one good drive that ended up with a touchdown. Everything else fizzled out or, 3 and outs. I mean, there are too many 3 and outs. We've said this for so long now with Iowa that there are too many empty drives, too many drives where you literally have nothing going and you end up punting. So it starts with Kirk. Brian Ferentz, I know there's a lot of hate towards Brian. I don't hate Brian at all. I wish Brian would change some things. I wish Brian all the best. I want Brian to succeed. Okay, I mean, I don't want this team's offense to continue to struggle like they are. But he deserves a huge amount of blame. He deserves more blame than Spencer Petras. Okay, more blame than Spencer, as does Kirk Ferentz. And then you have to look at Ken O'Keefe. If you want to talk about the quarterback position not developing, and I said this during our postgame show with Don Patterson after the Purdue game. If you want to look at our postgame show, go over to Iowa at the Voice of College Football. But look at Ken O'Keefe. Here's a guy who was the offensive coordinator at Iowa previous to Greg Davis. And, there has always been this sort of a stigma with Iowa quarterbacks that they regress, and I think some of that is overdone. I think the media makes too much of that at times. Fans make too much of that at times. But let's use one example, and I talked about this during our live show with Don on Sunday. Let's look at one example. The ability to slide as a quarterback. All right? Now, Iowa traditionally does not recruit mobile quarterbacks at a high level. They do have, throughout the Kirk Ferentz era, they have recruited mobile quarterbacks, but typically those mobile quarterbacks are not the guys that end up winning the starting job. Now, you can say there's a conspiracy within the program. I don't believe that to be true. The fact of the matter is, though, these guys just have not panned out. I think of Peyton Manziel being a prime example of that. Alex Padilla is mobile, or more mobile than Spencer Petras, and yet he's number 2 right now. And we assume nowhere close to Spencer Petras. I could go down the list. There are other guys that, again, have been more mobile, but are just not making the top of the depth chart for whatever reason. Brad Banks being the exception, really. Drew Tate was somewhat mobile. Same with C.J. Beathard, somewhat mobile, but most of Iowa's quarterbacks are statues. So you have to, when you decide to step up and run, which I know a lot of fans would wish that Spencer Petras would be willing to do more so than he is. And again, I go back to coaching for his lack of confidence in tucking it and running. But when he does run, the guy doesn't slide. And this is nothing new to Iowa fans. We saw the same thing with Nate Stanley. Nate Stanley was a baseball player. You would think Nate Stanley, being a former baseball player, I know he's a pitcher, but come on. You learn how to slide. And so you can say, well, that's on Nate Stanley. It's primarily on Ken O'Keefe, right? I mean, he was the quarterback's coach with Nate Stanley. He was a quarterback's coach with Spencer Petras. Now, here's the deal. You also go back to the C.J. Beathard era. Now we're talking about a different quarterback's coach, right? Greg Davis was the offensive coordinator and was, I believe, coaching quarterbacks at the same time. He didn't know how to slide. So then you start going down the line here. If it's not Ken O'Keefe, then where's the accountability from the head coach, right? I mean, if you're Kirk Ferentz, you have to be looking at this is just one simple thing that you teach as an offensive coordinator, as a quarterback's coach, how to slide and protect your body. And yet consistently, whether it's been Ken O'Keefe, Greg Davis, and again, I think Ricky Stanzi knew how to slide previous to Greg Davis. I'd have to go back and look at the tape, but I'm just talking the last 6 to 7 years. Iowa quarterbacks don't know how to slide. That's unacceptable. And if you're Kirk Ferentz, you have to acknowledge it, right? A lot of this is acknowledgement. You have to acknowledge the fact that, look, Brian, you're my son, but you're not developing guys like we need you to develop guys. Do better. I'm not saying you fire the guy, all right? I know Iowa fans just want to, everything's a knee-jerk reaction. I got to fire this guy, or hire this guy. No. First of all, it starts with accountability, acknowledgement and accountability. And right now, it's Brian Ferentz that has to be accountable. And then he has to hold Ken O'Keefe accountable, okay? Because if Brian says, look, you're right, Kirk, you're right, Dad, but Ken's my quarterback's coach, then if you're Kirk Ferentz, you say, well, you, and I'm talking to Brian, if I'm Kirk here, I'm talking to Brian, you've got to hold Kenny accountable. And here's the only, I don't want to say it's a conflict of interest, because it's not, and you see this with a lot of coaching staffs across the country, but here's the only struggle, I think, that you have to acknowledge is there as well within this coaching staff, is you have a lot of family and friends working for you, right? So Iowa's recruiting coordinator, Tyler Barnes, is Kirk's son-in-law. Kirk's son is Brian Ferentz, the offensive coordinator, right? Ken O'Keefe is a very good friend of Kirk Ferentz. Chris Doyle, who's now no longer on the staff, was a very good friend of Kirk Ferentz. Now, a lot of these coaches, they're good friends with each other because they've been working with each other forever. But I do believe that could be responsible for some of the stubbornness within the coaching staff and some of the kind of consistent problems like the quarterback or inability to slide at quarterback that we're seeing. Are you comfortable? And I'm not saying that Kirk isn't, but that's a question right now. Is Kirk comfortable calling Brian out for something like that? I would think he is, right? I would think Brian's comfortable talking to Ken, who's a lot older than him, but that needs to be done. And until I see a change at the quarterback position to where Spencer Petras learns how to slide effectively, then I'm going to continue to call that out. So, and I think I have every right to do that because, again, it's a problem. And that's not the only issue. I know, again, Spencer's inability to step up in the pocket. We haven't seen him do that. But again, you would think that would be somewhat. I know, we're talking in terms of couch potatoes watching these games, but Spencer Petras should learn how to step up in the pocket, right? That's not terribly complex, especially when that pocket begins to collapse. Really what we see from Spencer week in and week out is sort of stumbling when he's pressured and has no confidence kind of flipping out of the pocket. Nate Stanley did kind of have that ability to spin out of the pocket at times and make plays, but Spencer really doesn't know how to do that. He's just not doing it effectively, doesn't have confidence doing it. So those are all things, obviously, that I think fall back to the coaching staff. They fall back primarily to Ken O'Keefe and Brian Ferentz, but of course, Kirk Ferentz is responsible for all of it, so he's got to make a change or provide some admonition here to have these simple aspects of what you aren't seeing with Spencer Petras change and improve. So I know I don't want to sound like a Spencer Petras apologist. I did talk earlier in the year how I believe Spencer is actually a more accurate passer than Nate Stanley. I stand by that. The numbers bear that out. But he's not a better quarterback than Nate Stanley was. Okay, because there's more to the quarterback position than just standing in a pocket without a rush and putting the ball on target. So this comes back to the coaching staff. And look, Iowa's 6-1. I understand that. But if you're tired of a putrid offense, you're not the only one. I mean, the numbers bear that out. Iowa is worst in the Big Ten right now offensively. It's ridiculous. But we've been talking about that for weeks and really years. This is not a new problem at Iowa. And I know Kirk is on his last leg as the head coach at Iowa, whether that be 3 or 4 more years. Maybe it's 1 or 2 more years. I don't know. But he's still the head coach of this program, and this is a problem that we've seen. And I don't know if it'll fix, if it will be fixed. If I had to guess, right, to put money on it, I would guess that it won't be fixed because it really hasn't been fixed over the course of Kirk's tenure. We've seen stellar defensive play from Norm Parker's teams, now Phil Parker's teams, but more often than not, the offense is far behind. And so it puts a ceiling on Iowa's number of wins that they can hit year in and year out. And we do see consistency. I give Kirk a lot of credit for the consistent win numbers, win totals, year after year after year. We're talking 7 to 9 wins basically every year, with the exception being a few years here and there where Iowa's either gotten into the double digits as far as wins or 2006, 2012, where you have 6 or less wins. So I give Kirk. I'm not trying to attack Kirk here. All right, I'm a big Kirk Ferentz fan, but this defense is too good right now. The defense is in danger of being wasted because of a really bad offense. Okay, and I'm not here today to talk about Brian Ferentz as the next head coach, but this goes right into my belief that there's no reason on earth to believe that Brian Ferentz is qualified to be the next head coach at Iowa. Not as of, what is this, October 26, 2021. There's no reason for me to believe that. Okay? Again, that's kind of a subject for a different day. Wanted to talk about that. Again, accountability specifically with this coaching staff, with the offense. And then finally, how about Phil Parker? We love the guy. He's been great, but he's got to be held accountable for what happened on Saturday against Purdue. Because this is not just a one-time thing. This is 3 years now where Phil has gotten out-coached by Jeff Brom and the opposing offense for the Boilermakers. And, Jack Kerner made a comment after the game that, we tried to double-team Hankins. No, they didn't. There were very few plays where Iowa even had a safety over the top. Double-team Bell. Of course, Hankins was in coverage against Bell, but that didn't happen. And we've seen, again, consistency here, and Iowa struggles against certain teams. Another team that Iowa struggles consistently against is Northwestern. Now, again, this Northwestern team is really bad right now. I thought Northwestern would at least compete with Michigan, especially after beating Rutgers, and Michigan just destroyed Northwestern this past Saturday, 33-7. So I don't see any glaring matchup problems, although I guess one could argue Wisconsin has been a problem, but Iowa is coming off a win against the Badgers. So Phil's got to be accountable, but certainly he has been stellar as the defensive coordinator, not only this year but throughout his tenure at Iowa. So look, you look at it week by week. Phil was not good. His defense wasn't good this past effort, but really no one was besides a couple players, a couple plays off special teams. Really, everyone else. Again, this is a good time for the bye week, right? I mean, this was a good time to sort of get back to the basics. Pass protection was really bad. We didn't talk about that. That's why you can't place everything on just Spencer Petras or even on Ken O'Keefe. Pass protection is poor right now. You've got two tackles who are young. I'm not trying to make excuses for them. The interior guys aren't playing great either, with the exception being Tyler Linderbaum. Kyler Schott's trying to work his way back from being hurt. Maybe there's a reason there why he's not playing as well as maybe we thought he would. Cody Ince was hurt. He was down. Justin Britt's not playing great. Connor Colby's a freshman. There are lots of reasons why, or excuses if you want to call them that, why the Iowa offensive line isn't up to par. George Barnett is new at the job, so he's got some challenges to work through here as well. So there's lots of responsibility and accountability to go around for Iowa's loss to Purdue. But moving on, let's take a look at the Big Ten West, because as we know, Purdue losing to Wisconsin, and pretty handily. Now, Purdue stuck around. It was 13-13, I believe, at halftime, right? But in the end, Wisconsin's run game and defense was just too much for the Badgers. Now, I told you that David Bell had 240 receiving yards against Iowa. He had 33 against Wisconsin. So, I know it's not apples to apples with these things. Matchups are a big aspect of this. But if you're Iowa's defensive staff, you're looking at this saying, man, we really failed. We really failed against Purdue. And it's the third year in a row, third matchup in a row that we've struggled this mightily. I mean, it's again, I'm not going to rehash this over and over again, but again, Wisconsin holding Bell to that low of a number. Now, Durham did have 9 catches for 112 yards, which I find interesting. And I'm going to pull up Durham here. Of course, he's the tight end for the Boilers, who I really like. I think Payne Durham has an opportunity at the next level. But 9 catches, 112 yards, and a touchdown. So maybe there's something there. Again, we don't know exactly how Wisconsin's going to match up against Iowa defensively. But perhaps Sam Laporta can get going. Boy, I think it'd be huge. One of the big storylines heading into this week is how healthy is Iowa. Riley Moss was not on the depth chart that was released Monday. We'll hear from Kirk Ferentz. We're recording this Tuesday, so we'll hear from Kirk Ferentz later today. I'm sure on some injuries. But if Luke Lachey can come back and be that sidekick to Sam Laporta, you're going to see more 2 tight end sets, and maybe that's the solution against this Wisconsin defense, getting Sam Laporta and Luke Lachey involved more in the passing game. Certainly Spencer is comfortable throwing to Sam Laporta. But Wisconsin just ran a buttload on Purdue. I mean, listen to these numbers. Malusi, 27 carries, 149. Allen, 12 carries, $140. And 3 total touchdowns between the two of them. Now, Allen did have a 70-yard run, and Malusi had a 35-yard run. So there's some big plays in this game. Wisconsin's shown the ability to knock off some big plays, especially in the run game. But here's the biggest thing. Graham Mertz threw the ball 8 times. 8 times. 5 for 8 for 52 yards, and yet they win 30-13. They win by 3 scores with their quarterback throwing the ball 8 times. Why? Because they ran the ball effectively, and their defense produced turnovers. You look at the team stats here. 5 turnovers per Purdue. Just 1 against Iowa. All right. So Wisconsin forced O'Connell into tough decisions. O'Connell ended up 24 for 32. He had actually a good completion percentage for 200 yards, but he threw 3 picks. Plummer was 3 of 6 for 19 yards, and boy, Wisconsin really locked down on that running 3 quarterback thing. He's their running back. I'm trying to think of their other quarterback here. Burton. He was held in check. Just actually carried the ball 1 time for 1 yard, but it is interesting. You can see here how Brahms switched up his game plan a bit against Wisconsin, and it made sense, too. I mean, he even commented after the game how he was really surprised. He said this twice now. He's really surprised that Iowa tried to single coverage David Bell, single cover him. And certainly I'm surprised, maybe not the right word for me, because we've seen it over and over again, but it just doesn't make that line of reasoning makes no sense. And Wisconsin got it done. Again, going back to Wisconsin's running backs, Malusi and Allen, those guys aren't. I mean, I believe Allen's the kid that's really young, right? He's a freshman. I heard he was like 17 years old, out of Wisconsin. So, these guys are not Jonathan Taylor, Melvin Gordon type players, but they are young and talented, and they're gaining steam confidence-wise. We see week after week now Wisconsin running the ball better. If you look at team stats here, this is crazy. Wisconsin ran the ball for 290 yards, Purdue for negative 13. Now, Purdue wasn't able to run against Iowa either, minus some quarterback runs, which, again, credit to Jeff Brom for mixing those in, knowing that he was depleted at the running back position, and he got away with it against Iowa. But, again, 5 turnovers forced. So, if Iowa can force Graham Mertz to throw the ball, and Mertz did have at least one fumble in this game. Let me pull up his numbers here. Mertz had a fumble. Listen to the fumbles, though. Allen had 2 fumbles. Mertz had a fumble. Malusi had a fumble. Ingram had a fumble. 5 fumbles for Wisconsin. Now, they only lost 2. But this is not a team that takes care of the football, right? Each of their running backs had a fumble, and their quarterback had a fumble. So the primary ball carriers for this team do not take care of the football. We know Mertz does not take care of the football through the air. Didn't have any interceptions because he only threw 8 times, and that's what they want. I mean, obviously, that's what they want. If Mertz only throws the ball 8 times and he's healthy throughout the game, Iowa's in big, big trouble. They need him to throw the ball 15-plus times, and that's a pretty modest number. 15-plus times, and boy, you'd have to think that Iowa's secondary, unlike against Aiden O'Connell, that Iowa's secondary will be able to pick Mertz off and make it just a struggle. I mean, this is not a. I mean, listen to the numbers for Graham Mertz. On the year, he's got 2 touchdowns, 7 picks. He's got a QBR of 34.7. That ranks 113th in the FBS. He's 110th in passing yards, which isn't a big number for Wisconsin because they want to run primarily. But there's no reason for Iowa not to force at least a couple turnovers from Wisconsin. Turnover battle is the big key, and we'll talk about that here in a minute when I go through my keys officially here. But you just got to force Mertz to throw the ball more. Purdue did not do a good job of that, and as a result now, we look at the Big Ten West. You've got Iowa and Minnesota at 3-1. Minnesota knocking off Maryland in convincing fashion, and they might be the hottest team in the Big Ten right now. All right, and I think you could certainly make that argument. Actually, Wisconsin's playing well, but Minnesota. I mean, let's look at Minnesota's most recent results. After losing to Bowling Green, they've come back, beat Purdue on the road, beat Nebraska at home, and beat Maryland at home. Minnesota's hot right now. I give P.J. Fleck, I don't love the guy, but man, I give him a lot of credit for what he's done despite being down one of the best players in the Big Ten in Mo Ibrahim at running back. So they're 3-1. They're tied with Iowa, who's also at 3-1. So we know the Minnesota game will be huge. But the biggest game of the season, in my opinion, is this game this Saturday. Wisconsin's 2-2 in the Big Ten, so they're not out of the race for the West. Neither is Purdue at 2-2. Technically, I guess you could make the argument that Illinois is not out of it at 2-3, but let's just, for the sake of this argument, let's assume this is a 4-team race: Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Purdue. Because of Wisconsin's win against Purdue, I would certainly put Purdue at the bottom of that, and I'd say your top 3 are certainly Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a team that, again, is limited offensively. One of the better pass rushing teams in the conference, which is a scary proposition when you look at Iowa, because Iowa has not been protecting Spencer Petras very well. That 3-4 defense traditionally gets to the quarterback a lot. We think of 2017 Iowa, Wisconsin in Madison. Nate Stanley just couldn't get anything going. I don't even know how many passing yards. He had under 100 passing yards, no question about it. I think C.J. Beathard had a year like that against Wisconsin. So might have been actually 2015 when they won up there in Madison. So that's not a good combination. I said it weeks ago, even before Iowa lost to Purdue. Wisconsin is elite enough defensively that they're going to be in basically every game they play. Unless, of course, Mertz starts throwing a ton of picks, which happened against Notre Dame late. But basically, I mean, you look at Wisconsin's schedule so far. They've been in every game. They lost by 6 to Penn State. They destroy Eastern Michigan. I know they lost 41-13 to Notre Dame, but that was like 2 or 3 pick sixes from Mertz late in that game. It was actually close throughout. Now, Michigan is the one exception. I guess that I should bring that up. Michigan is the one exception, but again, 38-17. You look at the numbers. Mertz 8 for 15 with no picks, but Wolf came in threw a pick, and you look at the turnover battle in that game. 3 turnovers for Wisconsin. So you force this team into errant passes. Certainly they have shown they're willing to put the ball on the ground. But again, Wisconsin's defense is going to keep them in virtually every game, minus the games where, again, they kind of decombust. So, man, that defense right now, this offensive line, if I had to give you one position group that I'm not only most concerned about heading into this game, but also is the biggest key to victory, it would be the offensive line, because, although Wisconsin's run defense Wisconsin's run defense is good, don't get me wrong, but I think their pass rush defense is even better. I think Iowa will be able to run the ball a bit. I think Wisconsin is like number 1 or number 2 in the FBS in defensive rushing numbers. I think they're holding opponents to like less than 2 yards per rush. Now, some of those numbers are inflated because you have so many sacks Wisconsin has been able to administer, but that shows that they're stout against the run. So Iowa's offensive line is going to have its hands full. Again, let's hope Cody Ince is back this week. According to the depth chart, he is. Didn't sound like from Kirk Ferentz when we heard from him after the Purdue game that the Ince injury was real serious. They need everybody. They need all hands on deck on that offensive line. Monty Pottebaum, I think he's healthy. Let's rely on him. I'm hopeful that we see more 2-back sets where you have a couple guys that can protect Petrus behind the line of scrimmage. Let's just hope that there is some ingenuity and some creativity, because we don't often see that for Iowa in any game, let alone games against Wisconsin. Iowa seems to just sort of want to drive their head into the ground, bang their head against the wall against Wisconsin, and hope it works, and it rarely does. Now, they won last year. I don't want to say it didn't count, because it did, but it was a COVID year. Wisconsin dealt with a lot on the virus front. So Iowa's got to be creative. Don Patterson talked to me about, the ability to have 1 or 2 plays in the bag that you are, 90-95% confident will work. Choose to use them at the right time. It'd be nice to have 4 or 5 plays like that, but 2 things. A, you're playing a defense that's hard to scheme against, and B, Brian Ferentz in this offense, they've proven that they don't have that many plays in the bag. You think of the Penn State game, you have the misdirection throw back over to Nico Reganey over the top. That was probably the one play that Iowa was waiting to use. Now, I give him credit. I gave Brian credit at the time. I give him credit now for pulling that out at the right time. But you are not going to just be able to run your base offense and expect to be able to run the ball and get the ball downfield against Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin's pass defense, as far as their secondary is concerned, isn't nearly as strong as their pass rushing ability and their run defense. So Iowa, again, if they can protect Spencer enough to give him time to make some throws down the field to Keegan Johnson, I expect him to be heavily involved in this game plan on Saturday. I expect to see him, and I expect to see Tyrone Tracy. Those 2 guys, along with Sam Laporta, those would be my top 3 receiver threats for this game on Saturday. I think Iowa can score points. I don't know how many points, but they're going to have to score some, obviously. And then again, can you load the box and force Mertz to throw? I think Iowa can do that. Let's not lose total faith because of Iowa's lackluster performance against Purdue. Iowa's still been one of the better defensive teams in the country. I believe they rank top 5 nationally for points allowed per game. So it's a huge game. Implications are large. You win this game, you move to 4-1. Wisconsin, boy, this is basically an elimination. This is I don't want to say a do or die game for Wisconsin, but in a way it is. You lose this game, you're then 2-3, and Iowa's 4-1, and Iowa would have the tiebreaker. It would be very tough at that point. Not impossible, but tough for Wisconsin to win the West at that point. And that, of course, would set up a big game against Northwestern and then again another big game for Iowa against Minnesota. So the implications are large. I'm not going to make my picks today on the podcast. If you want to hear my official pick for this game as well as the the other Big Ten games across the country on Saturday, including Michigan State, one of the marquee games in college football this weekend, tune in to From the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, Amazon, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. Tune in late Friday night, and you'll get my picks for Iowa-Purdue. I'm still locked on to Iowa-Purdue. Let's move on. Iowa-Wisconsin, as well as games across the country. I want to thank you for listening to week 178 of Brada's Branded Thoughts. A couple housekeeping matters to bring up before we say goodbye for the week. One thing being, I know we brought this up over at Iowa at the Voice of College Football, but if you've listened to our post-game show with Coach Don Patterson over at the Iowa channel, I hope you have. We have a great time with Don every week. If you've listened to that post-game show and you enjoy what you've heard, and you're a big Iowa basketball fan as well, please let us know in the comments on YouTube. Send us an email, chat, Twitter, whatever the case may be, whatever you need to do to communicate with us. Let us know you'd like to have a similar post-game show for Iowa basketball, because we are in the process of making some decisions on whether or not we will be carrying a similar post-game show. That show will be right here on our channel on YouTube, From the Hawkeye of the Storm. But again, if you're enjoying the Iowa football post-game show or you'd like an Iowa basketball post-game show this season, please let us know in the comments so that we can bring you quality content as we always strive to do. And of course, after the game, after the Wisconsin game, we'll be over at the Iowa channel for Iowa post-game, and then we'll talk to Don Patterson Sunday night the 31st at 7 p.m. talking Iowa and Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us for week 178 of Brada's Branded Thoughts here From the Hawkeye of the Storm. We will talk to you next week, and very soon we'll be releasing our preseason predictions for Iowa basketball 2021-22. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Go Hawks.